It's no secret that a lot of long-term Star Trek fans are angry with the content currently being put out by Paramount under the Star Trek name. We spend a lot of time online pointing out the problems with the shows and the fact that despite alleged attempts to make them better, the canon violations are actually getting worse. What we don't often talk about, although some have made the attempt, is what should happen to fix the problems. I think we don't do that because it's obvious to us. Just make Star Trek, right? Unfortunately, it's also painfully clear that the studios don't understand at all, because they think that's what they've been doing. So this is my pitch to Paramount. Well, not really, but I'm going to go over what I think needs to be done to revive my favourite zombified property, and what I would do if I had control of it. 1. Rebrand. Let's face it, the damage to canon, characters, and the legacy of Star Trek done since 2009 is too great to fix in-universe. The bad robot era must be officially decanonised if you have a hope of getting the fan base to give you another chance. Yes, in an ideal world we could make it so that it never existed, but that's not an option, and though I don't understand why, these shows do have a following of their own. So let's listen to those fans and make the series Starfleet Discovery, Starfleet Picard, etc., inspired by Gene Roddenberry's Star Trek, but not an extension of it. They could then continue, or not, as a kind of fan fiction, and we could wish them well as we wave them goodbye. 2. Hire a new creative team. Naturally, I have nothing personal against the people making the current shows, but they have shown us time and again that science fiction really isn't their thing, so it's time for them to move on. Give them a new project, like a soap opera where feelings are key and drama is more important than facts. In their place, we need to hire actual sci-fi writers that understand not only the genre, but love the world and lore of Star Trek, or at least are willing to immerse themselves in it to make a good series. And no, that wouldn't be hard. There's a lot of people who were inspired by Star Trek growing up, whether they considered themselves full-on Trekkies or just casual fans, and would no doubt jump at the chance to help restore it to its former glory. A showrunner who is dedicated to making great Star Trek is also essential, but they can't be just a superfan. They need to be someone who can look at what will work best for the series and not get lost in their own headcanon or what they think would be cool to see on screen. Fans are very polarised right now. Some might even say they're prone to overreacting because of the way we've been treated over the last few years. The studios need to work at earning our respect and regaining our trust, and it won't be easy. 3. Should we still have diversity and inclusive representation? Yes, absolutely. That has been an essential part of Star Trek from the beginning, each iteration doing what they could during the times they lived in to push the boundaries and help us see the universe from different perspectives. What we need to take it out of is the marketing. Proposing a show based on a cast having one characteristic each is short-sighted at best. It needs to embody the future we want to see, where those petty differences are no longer a problem and we all work together. The conflict needs to come from outside, to test our philosophy perhaps, but we should not be weighed down by the same issues we have today. That just says you can't imagine a better future, and that's fundamentally not Star Trek. Star Trek should be leading the way in their storylines and character depth and development. Instead, when it comes to modern science fiction, we need to look at shows like The Expanse, For All Mankind, and yes, The Orville, although that's a whole other conversation. 4. A new show. I'm sure we all have an idea of what the new show should be, and I by no means consider my specific suggestions here to be the only answer. However, certain things must be taken into consideration in order for the show to have the widest appeal and recapture the spirit of the series. It needs to be set in the TNG era, post the Dominion War and Voyager's return. Prequels in films and TV are rarely a good idea, even when you're dedicated to making it fit into the universe correctly. Not only does setting it in the past make it harder to avoid canon violations, but it's just often looked at more critically just because expectations and knowledge around the IP is greater. And I think we've just had too many of them in recent years. It's time to move forwards, and in the core time frame most fans care about. It needs to be independent from existing storylines and characters. Sometimes it's a fine line between satisfying callbacks and pointless member berries, but since we've had a little too much of the latter recently, all of it is likely to be perceived that way for a while. The 137-year-old Admiral in Encounter at Farpoint was a respectful nod to the original series, but full-on callbacks need to be earned. By the time Sarek, Scotty and Spock were brought into TNG, they'd already established the show as a legitimate successor to TOS, so rather than propping up the new show, it felt like we were genuinely finding out something new about the characters, and again it was handled respectfully. The Naked Now wasn't as successful, although it did have its moments, and it helped to demonstrate that it was better not to rely too heavily on Trek's past unless you can bring something fresh to it. It needs to be able to stand on its own as a sci-fi series. The show needs to be grounded in science fact before you can start exploring the possibilities of fiction. Going straight to a fantasy-type explanation for things is a creative cop-out in sci-fi. You need to convince the audience that this is a future that is possible, and that even if they don't understand the physics of it, the characters on screen do. It needs to have the feeling of Star Trek, but in a way that's accessible to someone just looking for a good sci-fi series. Star Trek tends to work better as standalone episodes. It's also easier for an audience to dip in that way, but in a more modern vein, it's also a good idea to have a continuing thread, preferably a subtle one, that won't be resolved until the end of the season. Most of all, the show should capture your imagination, drawing you in and immersing you in a different reality until its story is told. To do that, it needs to be consistent within its own lore and creative in the possibilities it considers. It needs to be timeless. Star Trek at its best made us think. It caused us to consider other perspectives outside of our own lives and taught us to disregard petty differences and look at the heart of the characters. Saying that Star Trek was always political is disingenuous. Yes, they did sometimes reflect issues that were topical at the time they were made, but they did it by taking the politics out of them and putting them in a different, wider context to show larger themes, such as right and wrong, compassion and greed, or heroism and revenge. This is why they resonated with so many people in different walks of life all around the world, and continue to do so today. If a show is mired in one point of view and the current affairs of the day, it's much harder for people to relate to, and the universe in which the story is set gets smaller and less relevant as a consequence. It needs to be about a new ship and crew exploring unknown regions. In other words, Star Trek needs to get back to its roots, while moving the universe forward and not relying on its own past or tired sci-fi tropes. My take would be that this is the first purely exploration science mission since the Dominion War. With the permission of the Romulan government, the newly commissioned ship would venture into an unexplored region of the Beta Quadrant. Yes, I am going to ignore the film Nemesis, as well as everything that was made after it. The first officer would be a Romulan, there as part of a crew exchange for the mission, but the rest of the senior crew would have served together during the war, moving to the new ship together. This would give us scope for character development as a backdrop to the overarching story as they slowly reclaim their identities as Starfleet officers, a perhaps not too subtle metaphor for the IP itself rediscovering what it has lost. I don't want to get too far into the weeds of how I would populate the ship, however my choice for captain would be a Hermat from Peter David's New Frontier series, played by Leslie Ann Brandt. I think they're a fascinating race with a lot that can be explored due to their predator nature, etc., and my selection of actor comes from watching Lucifer. Leslie Ann plays a demon in that with a great deal of inner strength and bodily control, which I think would be perfect in a lead role. So those are my thoughts. What would be your choice for a new series, or would you try to save the current ones? Let me know what you think down in the comments.